look at where we were 10 years ago versus where we are, we saw a big bump, and we saw another bump when Methodists split. We ended up housing one in our last congregation that was, trying to get their footing. And so we often see that counter bump when something like that happens. And so I think in the future, we're really looking at how do we best use our resources so that we're not hoarding wealth, but we're really using it to invest in making our world a better place by, training folks, by sending national leaders in to do on-the-ground work with communities here. And so Unitarian Universalists mostly just hold steady. So kind of where everyone is up and down religiously, a lot of religious communities have experienced a decline over time. Unitarian Universalists have mostly just stayed the same. It's still a relatively small religion, but it's just kind of steady. So yeah.
You all sort of touched on a couple of things, and I'd love to hear just an explanation a little bit more of some of the issues and problems that you think have existed in the community in the past. I heard you saying, well, it kind of depends on where you are in the country. In some places they're, maybe more prevalent, but not really as vibrant. And I heard you mentioning about kind of a disorganization and such. And then I think both of you touched a little bit on kind of some Christian nationalist stuff. So I definitely think there's a bunch of good potential threads we could pull. Does anybody want to start with some explanation of some issues or problems that you've noticed in your own community? Go ahead.
I guess I would say it's a problem, but also an opportunity, which is there's a lot of resources available if somebody is in a faith community and they want to get involved, they want to organize. I happen to be the oldest of 4 kids, and in my family, there's 3 people that have postgraduate seminary degrees. My dad is a pastor, a missionary, my grandfather. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that people can draw from. And we have one more on the way. My youngest brother is a missionary right now, and he's going to school. What I'm trying to say with that is that there is a training, a vetting, a process that you go through if you want to be in leadership. And that is a huge opportunity within the secular community, because kind of what it is so far is somebody gets up and says, hey, I want to start a group, and ready or not, you're in a leadership position somehow, and you have a lot of people, if they're deconstructing, who are going through a very, what I would call, vulnerable moment in their life, or if they're leaving their faith community, their life is upside down, and right, so they've lost a lot of friends, just had a lot of loss in their life, period, and so they step into this community. And so I guess where I'm getting at is having a training and leadership development process within the secular community, which, as you mentioned, is so disjointed, for the really to be kind of like a mentorship and a leadership development and a vetting and making sure that there's not people taking advantage of their positions, that there really is some good positive checks and balances to making sure that people are being taken care of. And so that's an opportunity, and we see that sort of thing starting to happen, where some of us know a guy by the name of Dr. Darrell Ray, who has just started this year something called the Institute for Secular Leadership, I think trying to provide that service.
I was going to ask a question, because I know that there is some kind of process in place for the Ethical Society. What kind of resources are there? May I ask that? I went to divinity school at Harvard with the Humanist chaplaincy there, so did work with Greg Epstein, and I know they were really trying to get a lot off the ground with regards to this, and I don't know why it fell through, other than I did hear a little bit of Ethical Society is doing this, Unitarian Universalists are doing this, it kind of already exists. But I'm curious about if they're pulling from those resources, if that's okay to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the ethical societies in New York and Minneapolis and a bunch of other places, like you're saying, have had a long-standing tradition of, if they've been around for 100 years, they must be doing something right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that came from what was called the golden age of free thought, about this time, kind of ending around the 1910s, thereabouts, kind of like when for about 30 years, it was all the hotness, with Darwin had just released, the Origin of Species, and so kind of things, a lot of things were going that way, and I think that's where you see organizations like the Ethical Society really getting their bearing and being involved in a positive way in a lot of the struggles that were going on at that time, such as women's suffrage, such as any number of civil rights things. The short answer is I don't really know what they do, but I'm sure there's something, and I guess part of the process, and we can talk about this now, is figuring out that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of times the resources are there and you can kind of customize them to what your community is and what the needs are. But that's a good point. I'm curious, what I know that the American Humanist Association has a little bit of a leadership development program as well, but you're right, there are a few things.
I think you're hitting on a really good point, actually, because it's something we are currently really actively trying to promote. I think a big issue we had in the secular and especially the non-religious community, especially when you have people that have just deconstructed, it's a very delicate place because you start mentioning words like, you want to have contributions, like people think tithing, and there you go, you're already in. And we are now getting to a point where we're just like, okay, well, over 100 years now, we've been too careful with it, where now we barely have any resources. We don't have any control. We don't have any centralized hubs, nothing like that, where we can actually say, like, okay, this is where we can go to ask for, hey, I have an idea. I can go there to go ask if I can get some support for this. It doesn't really exist. It's mostly just, it's so disorganized in that sense because everybody's too scared to create any kind of centralized community here. Now, I do think that's changing. I'm working on something myself that is literally changing that. But yeah, it's a very common thing, and we notice it very much. Like we have the SOAR meetings that we have. Like we noticed ourselves how careful we were with that in the beginning until recently. I'm just like, guys, if we want to do something, you gotta put some skin in the game. It's just how it is,
Of course, whether you're talking about religious organizations, non-religious organizations, community organizations, all these things. One of the biggest things that's at the heart of what Elliot kind of pointed out and what we were talking about is this sort of general distrust that has grown around organizations and institutions in general. So you've seen both, so you see it in religious communities, you see it in political communities, you see it in everything right now, that people trust less and less our institutions. And often rightly so, right? A lot of our institutions have failed in many ways. I can go through a number of ways Christian communities have failed, but I can also think of many ways that our government fails us and many ways that our communities fail us sometimes. And so I think one of the challenges right now, because I'm also resonating with that deconstruction word, because a lot of Christians that show up at my doorstep are people that have deconstructed their Christian faith to a degree, but for whatever reason, they still sense their belief in God, and they still resonate with that through the God known in Jesus Christ, and yet they don't like the way it's been used. And so they're also trying to put that back together, and yet it's hard because they kind of like you're saying these people don't trust the idea of tithe. It's like I'm having to reimagine all of the things of our faith for them. All sorts of words in our liturgy and things like that are triggering or may say something that we don't mean it to say in our context. So I think that a challenge we're all going to face in the next decades is what it is to build new institutions that can be trusted. Yeah. And or rebuild institutions into modes that they can be trusted again. And that continues to be a major, major issue for anybody that wants to get anything off the ground right now. And I think a big problem, too, is that because we've lost that, I know a few of us that in this room went to hear a guy named Ryan Burge talk not too long ago, and he studies, what he does is he studies statistics about churches and faith communities and all this stuff. But one of the interesting things he said about one of the problems he thinks that our culture has encountered recently, at least our Christian culture in this country, is that he said we've lost all the moderate churches. And what he means by that is not churches that are milquetoast, but he means churches where people can cross over. Like there's some people that are conservative politically and some that are liberal politically, some that have this theology, some that have that theology. And I think all of our spaces, not just religious, but all of our spaces are getting so divided, it's hard to figure out how to put together institutions that a whole lot of people can trust anymore. You know, we don't trust our parties. You know, nobody trusts Democrats. Well, there's some people that trust Democrats and Republicans, but most people I know don't. Most people hold their nose and vote for one candidate or another or support a party or another, but fewer and fewer people, you know, just like the nuns are rising, independents are rising politically. Yeah, you know, it's this loss of trust in institution.
We had Ryan come for worship. He and I had a panel conversation for worship, and we asked that specific question. You know, we are founded and have always been a progressive faith tradition. How do we not water that down by holding on to that third space, right? And he's like, I have no answers for this, right? It's just a question and a noticing, right? And so that is really challenging because our values are centered on things that have become political, right? What does it mean to have inherent worth and dignity of every single person? It means trans people are allowed to be themselves in our sanctuary, right? Like that then becomes a political statement, even though it is a values statement. And so, you know, how do we maintain our identity and our values? And if someone labels this as a particular, you know, left-leaning political thing, then so be it, is kind of where we are at this point. Though I do very much see the need for that third space and that wrestling that has to be done back and forth with both sides or the full spectrum of beliefs, politically, socially, theologically, etc. I think that we are better when we have spaces that feel like that we have a covenant, in our words, a covenant. Behavioral covenant is how Unitarian Universalists exist together in the same space when we have varying belief systems, right? So we don't have a creed. So what is it that unifies us, right? We have these value statements, but we have a behavioral covenant of how we agree to be with one another. And so that is how we engage in these conversations when we have such vastly different belief systems within the congregation. So yeah, we even on a, you know, I'm currently teaching a course on religious trauma in our congregation and have all these folks who are recovering and deconstructing and all of these things. And I'm sure they're in every congregation that we find. And we often talk about language and how important language is. And of course, when you're speaking to people of all different belief systems in the same sanctuary, you're going to really have to play with language as it is. And people who are deconstructing often have, you know, I have this response where my body tenses up and I'm having this anxiety over this language. And it's in, you know, how we talk about it is, one, a desire to reclaim religious language so that the white Christian supremacists are not the only people speaking from a place of faith, right? There has to be someone who's able to use that language and use it for what I would consider to be good. And so how do I not give up that language that is our birthright language that we are entitled to use? And it's just like flying an American flag outside of my house. You're not going to tell me I can't do that because, like, I'm going to have the gay pride flag and I'm going to have the American flag and I'm an American too, right? Yeah. So how do we reclaim that language? And also, how are we tender about these people who have suffered great harm in religious institutes and are able to tend to that in a thoughtful way? And I don't ever think that there's a fully healthy balance except for a deepening of relationship and a deepening of trust. And through that, I think we can come to reconstruct in a really healthy way what faith to them then means.
I love that. And if you've got something, please go.
I think that's really fascinating because you're talking about using the language of covenants and re-examining the language of kind of like what binds you together and kind of like what do we have in common. And that's really fascinating to me because I think we're beginning to have those conversations within the secular movement almost in its infancy, in the sense that there have been some things that have been written, and maybe they're political, maybe they're not, but what it really comes back to is something that you just described, of getting a comfort level with using language that is directly taking on issues that I would consider moral. And you talk to a room full of secular people about morality, and it's just like, it's like that brings back memories of either somebody telling me how to have to live my life, or dogma, or things that we've much rather leave in the past. And yet, like you, I think, very observantly pointed out, a lot of organizations out there, such as the Christian Nationalists, do use that language and that symbolism to great effect, and they kind of wear the moral flag or whatever it is to give themselves, like, I don't know, moral standing, and we represent what's right. And if we don't have moral language that can show why that's a problem and what the alternatives are that can actually really be a part of the solution, we're kind of out there flapping, and I really hear what you're saying of finding moral language in a community that has really struggled with it. And I appreciate the role that organizations like the Unitarian and Universalists have had for the longevity that you guys have had over the years of kind of taking that faith tradition and that institutional knowledge and bringing it to the conversation, because I think it benefits all of us.
Yeah. I think being a female clergy person, my embodiment is already political. It's already deeply determining where my theology lies, just walking in. So every chance I can get to wear a collar and start some trouble, I'm going to do it, right? So I'm going to show up to the school board meetings. I'm going to show up to the library meeting in Rutherford County next Monday. I'm going to, do these things from a place of authority, knowing that I can't hide which way I lean theologically, and therefore probably not politically as well. So using that tool of oppression for liberation is really powerful, and that's a history that many clergy have operated from to reclaim that space and that identity.
And also, at the same time, Audre Lorde says you can't, tear down the master's house with the master's tools.
True statement.
And so it's kind of like there's a both and. There's a tension. Mm-hmm. There's a tension there. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Your very presence is political. Mm-hmm. I mean, it feels political. It doesn't. I served my last appointment. I was the only male pastor of 6 pastors on staff, and I had to navigate that very carefully. Mm-hmm. People would come to me simply because I was male, and I'd be like, I've only been here 6 months. You need to go talk to this person that's been ordained for 10 years and knows what they're talking about, that kind of stuff. But you're right, so much codes as political. And I've told my congregants, I'm like, we have to be who we are and not worry about how people perceive it. When you stand on values, people are going to make assumptions about who you are. And all I care about is that we're doing what we perceive to be right and just. And I remind them that, our political parties used to code differently than they do right now, And so standing up for what's right may code a certain way, but that doesn't mean anything about our essential identity in the long run.
I have a question for you two. Do you guys feel like your worldview has been hijacked in that sense?
Our role has been hijacked?
Your worldview?
Oh.
The way
I can't speak for you because you come you're in such a different tradition in some ways because you hold space for so many. As somebody that's a Christian clergy person, I would say both yes and no. I feel like there was more of a space for Christians that thought similarly to me at one time, sort of around the same time you were talking about with the free thought movement. So if you know anything, especially about Christian history in our country, at the turn of the 20th century, the social gospel was really ascendant. This idea that what the church was about was making sure that people were taken care of. We got a lot of things done, like women's right to vote, and a lot of child labor laws were the work of a lot of Christians that were part of the social gospel movement. Now, you also got temperance. But what we forget is temperance, alcohol in the middle of the 1800s to the beginning of the 20th century was a huge justice issue because there were women who had no rights, no vote, no money of their own, in homes where men were getting drunk and beating them up. And women started fighting for temperance because it was an issue of life and death. And while we found out that you can't legislate morality quite that heavily,
Did we learn that?
well, I don't know. But, they learned it on that issue, and we'll learn it again, I think, every time we try. But it was rooted in that sense of doing what is right and of taking care of vulnerable people. In fact, one of my favorite, just because I think it's funny, so I'm going to mention her now. Do you know her name was Carrie Nation. She was a Methodist temperance movement person in the late 1800s, and she became known nationally because she would go into bars with a hatchet and bust up the saloons. And saloons started having signs in their bars that said, "Every nation welcome but Carrie." but it was a true justice issue. So that was a real strain of Christianity for a while. But the larger scope of Christianity has been one of dominance too. Ever since Christianity united with the Roman Empire in the 300s, it started to lose its way, and it's been trying to find its way back ever since. So in some ways, I don't feel like it's been co-opted at all. I feel like we're finally trying to get away from some of what it's been for a long time, and we got people fighting to keep it there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I did not know that history, and that's really fascinating. I might want to preach on that one day. No, our faith tradition has long history. The roots of it were back from the Nicene Council, and this idea that y'all's dude beat up our dude, like literally physically punched him, and that's how Trinitarian was born. But our faith traditions, Unitarianism and Universalism, merged in 1961 specifically around the civil rights because we wanted to merge our resources and our people to better make an impact on civil rights. So our entire foundation of our faith tradition as it exists right now is built on resistance, heresy, and social change. And so we've always kind of set separate, but as someone who is religious, there's a lot of explaining that I have to do. When people meet me, I immediately drop the F-bomb so that they're like, "Oh, okay, you're a different minister than I thought you were," right? This is just my hack for it, if you will. And so there's a lot of what you put on me as a clergy person is not necessarily what I am. And so differentiating, I'm actually not Christian. I use the term minister. I'm an ordained minister, but I'm not Christian. And so clarifying that has become way more complicated, I think, over the past 20 years or so in general. But I don't feel like it's been co-opted specifically. I think it's always been kind of how we have resisted, if you will, to differentiate.
It's interesting because I was at you guys' sanctuary or church, within the last year, and I noticed that you guys had like a class for new members, and people come in and they learn kind of some of the main core values and things that maybe are part of the covenant. And that was really interesting to me because I don't really think I've ever been a part of or seen much of that equivalent within the secular movement. The reason being is that for the last, 25 years or whatever, since new atheism has been a thing, there's so much of the language has been about what we're not, what you don't believe, with distinguishing yourself and showing why that whatever it was that you were in before is wrong. And unfortunately, a lot of the language becomes, oh, they're so dumb or so wrong or so corrupt or whatever it is. And so it's becoming has been like an othering thing. You're focusing on what you're not. And I like a quote by Simon Sinek who said, if you're fighting against something, you focus on the thing you hate. But you fight for something, and you're focusing on the thing you love. And the reason that's so meaningful to me is because I think in the secular community that for years has been focused on what we're not, we're kind of at a turning point. a bit of an inflection point where we really have the opportunity to turn the corner and not only have conversations like what you guys are describing of, okay, what is it that does bring us together? What does it mean to be a good person? What does the good life look like? What does a community look like that we all share? What are some of the answers to the questions that religions have always tried to solve for? Like where do we come from and what happens, with death and all these just things that really give meaning to a community in a positive sense, especially the part about how do we treat each other? What do we owe each other? If we are going to have a community, what does it mean to support it and get some skin in the game like you're talking about? I think that is a huge area of opportunity. And that is where I think the getting away from the language of atheism, or maybe that's just a starting point, can lead to something that I think has a lot more promise. I like a quote by Dale McGowan, who is a thinker in Atlanta, and he said, atheism is the first step. Humanism is the 1,000 steps that follow. And I think we've taken, or some people have taken that first step, but there's really a lot of exploring that can happen, a lot of conversations and important covenants, really, that can happen with, okay, now where do we go from here? And so as we look to what I would see as the next 10, 20 years, I think that that's going to be a big part of where we're going. Not just the deconstruction piece, because that has been done a lot. But now, what about construction, exactly, or reconstruction? Okay, let's start putting things back together, because at the end of the day, you got to have a place to live in. So what does that look like?
Yeah, on that topic, I think of Chris Stedman's work, right? This bridging that he's doing, and how in the next 10, 20, who knows what's going to come of what's happening in our political environment right now. But the only way to get through it is together, right? And so like checking our egos, right? And being able to say, what is it that we can do together to make a greater impact? It doesn't mean that you have to change your position on things, doesn't mean that I have to change my positions. What can we do together? And know that we don't have to be perfect in order to do it, right? And so, creating a narrative in which we're talking to each other and creating a story together, really, about how we have tackled this time together. Religious communities, non-religious communities, I think we can't differentiate between the two. If we're all fighting for the same thing, we have got to get in the trenches together and do it. And so that's very much what I see. That I forget what the term was after the new atheism, the kind of hard launch of humanism, specifically as the Reconstruction era, and this really like learning how to be in community with people who believe differently than you are. That group, Chris and his cohort, began to kind of really nurture, if you will, in the world. And I've been disappointed that I haven't seen more of it, more of that push towards it. And I also wonder, for the both of you, at what point do secular communities, when they start to organize in this way, do they then become just a replication of religious communities?
That's a good question. I have a good answer for that, too.
Well,
I think, go ahead.
I mean, if you had a thought on that, I'll let you talk for sure.
So that's a really good question, I think, and I do think the bridging the gap between that two is the most important mission we have for all of us right now, especially since a lot of issues out there right now are literally affecting all of us, and especially, I think we literally agree probably on 90% of the things, and so why are we so focused on the 10%? That's, it's okay that we don't agree on everything. I mean, what makes the world kind of interesting, I feel like, But on your second point that you were saying, like how are the secular community, how are they trying to figure out? So yes, in a sense, so I created something called Lantarianism. It is it's a living framework for more of it doesn't really address the whole dogmatic area of it. It just grabs what religions have done right, in our opinion. All those things that we can learn from those things, like how can we use that in a secular or non-dogmatic way and make it a meaningful framework for us going forward as humanity? That's really what that is based on. And I wrote a whole scripture on it, and I'm also very into reclaiming some words, and like you said, religious words even sometimes, like the word scripture, for example, and remodeling that in a way that is positive and helpful for human growth. So, yes, the secular community misses symbolism. We miss like things like we stand around together, what we stand for. But I don't think ever, at least the way that I'm looking at it, if it's going to work the way going forward, the way that I envision it, it's never going to be an opposition of anything. It's going to be like, where can we work together, and where can we create an actual better world for the entire human race, preferably. But, it is challenging, and symbolism does come with challenges as well. However, it also depends on how you approach symbolism. Do you make a symbol, for example, a very steady thing, and it can only mean one thing, or does it become an evolving symbol that evolves as you do? It can change meanings. Like, for example, that is something that I very much took from the more Buddhist and Zen traditions. Like, they'll have, like, the Zen circle is a perfect example of that. The meaning evolves as you do. So those things still stand central, but they don't necessarily become a tribal indicator, if I can say it that way. I don't know.
You guys are doing phenomenal, first off. And I have all of these really deep, profound, heady questions here. And I'm actually just going to skip most of them, because sometimes I think the simplest question can really help illuminate complex and difficult problems. And you guys have done a phenomenal job laying out the landscape in a lot of different ways. And the simple question is, so what do we do? If all of these problems exist, if there's maybe a co-option of some of the traditions or faith, backgrounds, or a lack of organization or new leaders, or maybe we just aren't plugged into the resources, or maybe there's a lot of trauma in the past in all of these communities. Just plain and simple, what do we do? How do we address that? Is there a way? Or do we just keep stumbling around? Do we need to look back to some 2,000-year-old writings? I mean, what do we do, guys?
That's really the great question, the million-dollar question. And I think where my heart goes in thinking about that is, number one, okay, within our community, we need to become more comfortable with kind of like what you were just describing, of using the moral language, of figuring out what do we owe each other, the humanism piece. And that's certainly important. But what that will open up is something that we really have not really cracked the code on, which is kind of like something that you guys have a lot more experience, I guess, with, which is the community piece. In other words, bringing a group of people together that can sustain over time, and that people are getting value from enough that they're willing to invest in that. It's funny, you used a phrase earlier on that kind of made me smile. You said, well, we want to be involved politically because we don't want to be accused of hoarding our wealth. In terms of we want to use it, and that's a phrase that I don't think I've ever heard within the atheist movement, in a sense of like having something that has had enough longevity and investment from its community to really have kind of like a seed money, whether it's to bring staff to an organization to be able to really develop and devote the time to it. We just haven't seen that a lot. With a few exceptions, we haven't seen that a lot. So it's community. I think that what that will open the door to, in the sense that if people know what they believe and what the covenant is in a secular community, then they will be willing to invest in that. If they know what they can count on their leaders for, they will invest in that. And then you see places like this church, which I think is wonderful, and places like your sanctuary, which I've been to several times and I think is beautiful. It's like, I kind of have to confess, I have a little bit of a, venue envy, in the sense of all the things that you could do, that you guys do, that we could do, if like, it would be a game changer, right? Just having a space that you don't have to pack up and pack out. It's like just that and your community knows it's going to be there.
I challenge you, because the way that we're looking at religious organizing and religious institutions is not maintainable in the future. what does it mean to be a congregation of many congregations? What does it mean that you come into our space or this space or any space and you are your own entity that is also a part of a larger community? And we pool our resources together, right, to support you in the mission that you do, because some folks are never going to be comfortable in a worship service, even if it is open to all different faiths and no faiths alike. To have your own time in that sanctuary to create something that's meaningful for your community, and also serve together in service projects, pool our resources to be able to sustain a building, like all of these things. Like, why do you need to have your own space? Why do we need to have our own space? How do we create something in which we lovingly care for one another in community and are able to coexist together to better both of our situations?
I mean, that is beautiful. And that is, I think, the dream. Absolutely. I think the assumption we make on our side sometimes is that we don't think any other, organization would ever work with us on that, because they feel, especially within the Christian community, like the moment they hear like non-believer, atheist, or like that has such baggage, right? Which is one of the reasons why I created Lantarianism, is to not even focus on that anymore. It's on what we do create.
Right.
So, and I think that would melt beautifully with what you're suggesting.
It's funny sitting here as somebody who's trying to help a church get back in a building right now, because I used to think, to hell with buildings, who needs one? And I've realized that it is nice to have space where you can be and be you, and have, like, we set up every week. We come into a space that is shared, and it's beautiful. And we've made lots of connections with the school we're in, and it puts us in the community. And it's taught us a lot about being the church beyond the walls of the church. And yet we do sort of long to have a place. And so both of those things can be true at the same time. But I do think you're right 100% that all spaces now are going to have to be more agnostic, and do work across belief systems, partner with one another. Like, as we are building out this building that we are moving back into, my goal is for it never to just be our building. Like, we are going to go in with partner agencies that are already using our space, because I don't want our church to ever remember it being just our space. I want them to remember it also being the space that serves this community agency, this organization, this group. We would be happy to host Conversation Coalition or other groups that are non-faith, those kinds of things. And I do think that is part of moving forward. But to your really big sort of grand question, because your question, when I heard it, was a big one in my mind. I think we're living in an age where I think most of us for the rest of our lives are going to be living in an age of profound stumbling. You said stumbling through. I think there are certain times in the history of the world, every generation has its own challenges, and things always change in every generation too, but sometimes change more than others. And sometimes are more challenging than others. And I truly think that the advent of the kind of technology we have today is the biggest change in the way that we relate to one another around the globe since the printing press. Yeah. And if you look at the history of the world in the aftermath of the printing press, it was a shit show for a long, long time. And you had, Christians killing Christians, and people, groups of people killing groups of people, and all of this. And eventually we ended up with the advent of the nation states, Nobody could imagine nation states 500 years ago. We kind of think of countries as having existed forever. They didn't 500 years ago. Now, the thing that we think of as being permanent today didn't exist 500 years ago. And I truly believe all of us are living at the front edge of a tectonic shift in human history. And that's both, when I was younger, 20 years ago, I thought that was super exciting. There was a Christian thinker named Phyllis Tickle, who was a lay theologian. Do you know Phyllis Tickle at all? She was a lay theologian in the Episcopal Church, actually from Tennessee, from Memphis, but she was in the Christian publishing world for years. But a very, very mystical thinker, and also a very deep thinker. And in the last few years of her life, she got really interested in thinking about where the Christian church in the West might be headed, but also where our world was heading. And she talked about this being a hinge time, that there are certain times in human history that are hinge times. And she said, I think we're entering one of those where everything shifts. And at this time, just as you were talking about the emergence of nuns, a lot of Christians in her circle were part of what was called the emergence movement in Christianity. People were saying maybe something new is popping up here, and it was called Emergence Christianity, and there was this group of people that were working on that. But she used to say, and I loved to go hear her talk when I was in my 20s, and I thought it was so fascinating, and she used to always say, but the hardest thing about these hinge times is we never can get through them without lots of bloodshed. Can we do it this time without lots of bloodshed and lots of carnage and lots of damage? And I thought, oh, we're better than that now. My 20-something-year-old self thought, even somebody that's in the Christian church and believes in sin thought, oh, we're better than that now. And now I look and I'm like, dang, she was right. Yeah. You know, she was right. I mean, we are entering a tumultuous period. Yeah. And I think we're going to be stumbling, all of us, for the rest of our lives. And we can either see that as scary, or we can also see it as us being sort of pioneers on the forefront of whatever is to come. And that's kind of what I try to lean into on my better days.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you guys are both talking about and what I'm hearing from you, Martin, because I think there is a huge opportunity here, and I really hear, and anybody who knows me knows how concerned I am about the risks that lie ahead for us as a country and all of that. But I think the opportunity is that as individually in our own communities, we do the work of defining what we are for and what is the positive vision, rather than focusing on what we are against. What that will open is the opportunity to align with people who do share positive values. For example, as humanists, once we realize that we do have things in common, that, let's say, I don't know, if it's only 4 out of 10 that we value, well then, by all means, let's work together on those 4 out of 10, because I know people here that are involved politically or in activism, and you guys see each other on a regular basis, whether it's secular or progressive Christian, or it's like we are allies and fighting for a lot of the same causes so much of the time, that individually, I know that secular people, the non-religious broadly are right now stable around 28%, but those who are atheists, in my community, I'd say right around 5, those who are agnostic, right around 6. You're not going to move the needle politically with those numbers alone on anything. But if we can figure out that there are like-minded Christians and other faith communities that we can work with, now we're talking. And when you have groups like evangelical, militant, Christian nationalist leaning organizations that, as best I know, are right around 25%, at least in terms of the big community, and becoming more aggressive, it's going to take a coalition. It is going to take people aligning on shared values and really knowing that, hey, you might have a God belief that might be different than mine, but I know that I can work with you on this, this, and this, because it's going to come to that in terms of really knowing who you can count on. And so I agree with what the language that you're using of the hinge times and like the almost like the scariness of that. I think we're having to think outside the box. Like you're talking about with a sanctuary, we're having to think in ways that we haven't before, because it's either adapt or you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I spent time in Minneapolis in January for the big protest, and I got to witness how that's being done currently there. The entire city is aligned. All the clergy, all the faith clergy work together with secular folks. Everyone has their role, they work together, and their goal is to not focus on those few things that they have that are different from them, but to say it doesn't matter right now, we're fighting for each other's lives and for our neighbors, and that is of the utmost importance, so everything else can be checked, because it's all ego, right? And so there are beautiful examples of this being done right now as we speak, up there and across the country, I'm sure, and I'm sure across the world too, but here in our backyard, if you will. And we need it in Tennessee specifically. Like, holy crap, we really need to be aligning our efforts right now in Tennessee to take on some of the shenanigans we're witnessing. And I think to your point about organizing, the Weston Clergy Group meets every month, and we talk about how we align things so that we can further our causes. Yeah. And so, having a seat at the table is really important for the secular community. Having someone represent your community at those meetings so that you are also understanding, we're like, oh, the synergy is happening, right? This is how we can be involved, how we can organize around this, and how we can show up together. I think cultivating a space in which, you have to say, I'm going to hear some God talk today. Although it's pretty well in check. They all still just assume that we're Christian as well. So sometimes the rabbis and our UU ministers have to kind of be like, hey, you're not talking for everybody right now. But if you can do your own work to sustain being uncomfortable for a moment in that, it is worth the effort to do it, right? So, there are ways that you can already plug into that system and we can work together. And it's just inviting you to I am inviting you to the table, although I'm brand new to this group. But I can reach out to the organizer and say, hey, is there someone who can be here from your group consistently to show up at the table so that we can organize together around these important issues?
Yeah, I think we'd be super down for that, because that's I think that's what we're trying to do. It should be the rule rather than the exception, like what you said in Minneapolis. I feel like that's the only way we get the needle moving in any way, so why not?
Yeah, big time. And what I am hearing both of you guys say is, with the working together piece, a few of us in this room organize an event called NanoCon, which is the Nashville Nonreligious Convention. And something that we've done last year is that Jeff from this church came and was a part of a panel of Conversation Coalition on Sunday morning, just almost to say to our people, our community of 350 some secular folks, hey, by the way, you might not know this, but there are Christian people that we can work with. And I think that's kind of like there are. Okay, cool. And this year, as some of the challenges and issues that you were mentioning, we're having Monty Mater, who right here in Nashville, love her. She identifies as Christian and can quote scripture like nobody I've ever seen. And what I appreciate so much about her is that she is going to be able to have a conversation with the Christian nationalists, as somebody who identifies within that Christian community, still can use that language much more effectively than I ever will. And so, man, whatever I can do within my secular community to support her and to give her the platform and the standing that she needs to really be able to lead that charge, is like, my gosh, why wouldn't we? And same thing with other people. There's a conversation, we have workshops and people can apply to present a workshop, and out of about 22 workshops that are going to be presented this year, there's 4 that have come forward of people talking, okay, now once you've deconstructed, where do you turn the corner? Where do you go from here? And I say that because that's something that we haven't seen before. So I think what you guys are describing, the conversation is going that way in a very positive way. And where I'm going is that another person in Nashville, Mike Maishiro, is talking from a Christian perspective. And yeah, you want to share your perspective, what you've been learning to the secular community? Please do. We need to be able to compare notes. And talking about politics and activism, we need to be able to align politically. And I think it's only headed that way. And I hope to see more of it. So.
You guys have given us so much wonderful stuff already, and I'm going to steal your microphone back and trade you. Yeah, because I am going to walk around here in a second if anybody does have questions. But before we go to you guys, I get to ask at least one more question. That's the entire reason of putting on these events, let's be honest. So there's been a lot that we've talked about in terms of some issues. There's been a lot that we've talked about in terms of our communities working together, right? Looking forward, I want you to put your best prophesying hat on. What is one thing in the next few years that you are concerned about being potentially a problem for your community? And what's one thing that you are excited for or hoping, hey, maybe we'll do this in the next few years, right? Next couple of years, I'm really concerned that the UU community is gonna, or man, I really, really hope, by 2030, all of us atheists have whatever. And then again, if you guys have any questions or anything that you want to throw out there, I'll be scanning, so just throw a hand up, I'll come stand next to you, and we'll get through as many as we can. Again, I have like 10 more questions that we can totally ask if you want, but I don't think anybody here wants me to talk more. So, one thing that you are hoping for, looking for in a positive sense in the community in the next few years, and one thing you're maybe a little bit concerned or just worried that might happen.
I guess I'll begin. Yeah, I mean, what I'm concerned about is, I honestly think that I'm concerned about it in the world in general because of the way things are going. It's becoming so opposing, and the tribalism taking over the actual humanity, and that's something that I'm really concerned about. At the same time, I also understand the necessity of having a unified voice for certain groups. So it's a tricky balance, I think, because how do you get a unified voice without turning it into a tribal, and we're just behind something, and we don't even know what we're saying anymore, but we're just doing it because we want to be a part of the group. So I guess more intentionality is going to be my hope for humanity moving forward. And I mean, yeah, I think we can all hopefully agree with that. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Martin, and to me it kind of ties into the question or the issue that you brought up earlier of how do you present where you're headed from becoming basically a duplication of some of the problems that you've had before. And yes, we are having conversations about values, and I think there's a huge opportunity there. And we've already talked about that a lot, where I think the opportunity could take us is to have a lot more transparency and checks and balances and like more accountability to each other, to where, like you guys are describing, churches or organizations in the past that have been still very power focused and power driven and about like using essentially moral force. We are ultimately finding ways to be accountable to each other in ways that we're learning. We're learning as we go. How do we really listen to, and how do we hear and hold space for those who are the least powerful in the conversation, those whose voices are marginalized? I guess where I'm going with that, though, is that there really has to be an opportunity to find common ground, to, I guess, continue the creative process, the evolution of what the community is going to look like in a way that we haven't experienced before. We're talked about thinking outside the box and working with people that we wouldn't have otherwise considered working with, and thinking outside the tribalism paradigm or whatever. Hey, we need to be able to work together, and I think that's where things are headed. And I guess the concern is really that we miss the opportunity. Like a lot of these battles, for lack of a better word, are happening like time now. And the demand for moral clarity, and to be able to say, that is not just, I don't like it. No, that is wrong. And that needs to be done differently because there is going to be real harm. So we need to be able to use that language in moral terms. And like I see between now and the midterm elections as a major, like, it's now or never type of a moment. And my concern and my fear is that in the wind up to that language and those coalitions being built, that we're not where we need to be. But again, that takes us back to the opportunity. It's like sometimes we don't make the choices and the changes that we need to until it's like we have to. And here we are.
I think you've both articulated sort of, and especially you articulated some of my biggest, like the big fears and hopes. And you kind of went a little more into detail about those things too. I think if you were to ask me, Elliot, you also asked about our own tradition or my own position. And as I look at the United Methodist Church and what we've recently come through, I think my fear is that we are going to be in a save the institution mode and lose sight of a potential opportunity to be something different than we've been, or to lean into the better aspects of our inherited tradition. Because actually, I think as far as Christianity goes, I think Wesleyan theology, and John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist movement, but that Wesleyan theology, actually at its core, has a lot of gifts to offer Christianity right now in a different way of thinking about how we process our understanding of God and faith if we're Christians. So my hope is that the United Methodist Church can sort of be renewed and be sort of a gift to Christianity, as Christianity needs to continue to retool the way it thinks about itself in our culture. And so I hope that in our own little way that we make a difference within our tradition, but then also that we continue to be a people that make space for all of God's children, as we would say it. So.
I'd say something I'm looking forward to is our community, my specific congregation, bringing on a new settled minister. There's a resurgence of energy that always happens when there's a new leadership, right? And capturing that. But there's just a lot of vibrancy right now in the community and purpose around everything they're seeing in the world and how they are learning to show up in braver ways to contend with it. That's really exciting work for me. The congregations really we're doing a lot of risk assessment work and asset mapping work, right? So figuring out, what do we have to leverage? How much are we willing to give away for the cause? Are we going to drain our endowment fund? Are we going to mortgage our building? What are we going to do to live our values fully in the world and how we show up in the world? And that's really exciting. They have a bail fund for me now. I know I look very meek and mild, but
Troublemaker.
yeah, I'm a little troublemaker. So they're learning to be bolder in how they show up in the larger community, and that's really energizing for me. And I'm excited about it. And our faith tradition as a whole is doing the same. And things that I worry about at the same time, being an outward spoken faith tradition that names names, so to speak, it can make you a target. And so, like many congregations, we have full-time people that are like not in our congregation but in the UUA who are scanning the dark web to look for threats for us because there are credible threats that are happening all the time. There was a shooting in Knoxville in 2006 or 2008 something of a UU congregation just for living out our values. And so I think the louder and more bold we get in how we show up in the world, the more and more likelihood we are to have crossover with some really scary stuff. And so coming to terms with what that means. What does sacrifice mean? We're all going to have to sacrifice something. What are we willing to sacrifice for it? So those are two things that spring to mind for me.
Awesome. Well, I haven't seen any hands just yet. Know that you can throw it up there. I won't force anybody. Again, I have a bunch of fun questions here. And I feel like we're at this point in the night. We've gotten to know each other well enough. We can maybe poke a little at each other here. My question, pretty simply, is there something about the other community that you really don't like? Is there something about, again, either the agnostic or that atheist, secular humanist space? It's just, man, when I see those guys on the TikToks and the Facebooks, God, they're always, or what about those Methodists, huh? Is there anything specific you could say about the other community that, don't worry, I'm going to bring it back home to some loving peacefulness and get together stuff, but is there anything particular that comes to mind that you could say, gosh, that thing right there is something I really hope never comes to my community?
I mean, I have one thing, but it's not specific to y'all's communities. I would say I do see this in the Christian world a lot, and it's kind of alluding to a little bit what I was saying earlier. Is this blind copying and not intentional, actual not knowing what they're talking about. It's along the same lines as like TikTok psychology for me, like the same thing, like people are just adopting phrases and they're just repeating them. They're not even knowing what they're saying, I feel like. And that comes with this kind of virtue signaling that I feel like is very dangerous. And I guess I would wish that even in the Christian community, but in any community really, that there's more, the way kids grow up or whatever like that, more intentional about actually thinking about what you're saying and actually having thought through what you're about to say, instead of just repeating a certain part of scripture and then just going about your day and literally doing exactly the opposite of everything you just said. So I would wish that there were more intentionality in that. I think that's the way.
And I agree with that, and this is not to defend against that, but one thing that does make me think of, that has been pointed out by people even like Russell Moore, who used to be high up in leadership in the Southern Baptist Church, is that one of the interesting things we're seeing right now is a lot of people today who claim to be Christian and are using a lot of that language and using it in powerful ways are actually not part of Christian communities anymore. They don't really go to church. They don't really, it's more of an identity marker. And so you're right, they're copying this language. And that's a big problem, because I think at least, even when Christianity is at its worst, at least if you're in a room full of other people, you're sometimes checking each other to some degree. And I personally don't even think, I don't think Christianity as Jesus practiced it and taught it and imagined it can even be done individually. But that's a dangerous thing that's happening in our culture, I think, is that a lot of people now that still claim the name Christian and use a lot of the language are actually not part of Christian communities anymore, at least not very actively. And that does make that language become even more of a mimicry and of a tool. And that can also happen within Christian communities, and there are plenty of Christian communities that do that too. So again, I'm not saying that to defending it. It just reminded me of that. I've heard a lot of people that are looking at what's happening in Christianity right now also talk about that phenomenon, and it can be a dangerous thing. There's nothing that makes me like angry or anything about an atheist or agnostic, but I do think
Got something.
But I do think one thing that I sometimes wish for, and this is a sort of a two-way street, and I may have said this to some degree in here before, but like there's both an assumption that people of faith are non-rational and are stupid or are just invested in make-believe or whatever else. And I think that's a denigration of the spiritual impulse that many, many people have. And whether you think that impulse is simply a matter of our nature, and can be explained rationally or not, I think that those of us who still feel drawn to spiritual practice and faith, some of us, a lot of us, deserve some credit for still having brains. And then on the flip side, I sometimes feel like, and for a while anyway, I think that was a detriment for the new atheists too. I think they were losing part of their humanity a bit. And so I like to see a turn more towards humanism again.
Yeah, I think we would all agree with that, probably.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think the hyper-independence and lack of accountability is really kind of what you're pointing at. And so there is a distinction among clergy, and this can be considered classist, the distinction between the learned clergy and the called clergy, right? Those folks who just say, I feel the Spirit, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to just say the same thing that I was taught to say from so-and-so, and I'm not going to have any accountability for it, right? Versus learned clergy, who are required to go through school to a higher level of degree, who are required to pass tests, who have an accountability process in place, so that if you are saying something that is deeply harmful theologically to your community, or if you're behaving in a way that's deeply harmful, you can be held to account at the highest level. And so that also pisses me off, right? Because I'm thinking, like, you are doing a terrible disservice to people of faith. You're hurting your people as a hospital chaplain. Some of the harm that you hear theologically come out of people, especially at the end of their lives when they're terrified of what's going to come next. It breaks your heart open to think that someone in a position of authority and power told you to believe that. The shit that I have seen from the patriarchal men who are taking advantage of people in their congregations is life-destroying for people. And so being on the other end of watching people wrestle with that and have to deconstruct that, but not really having the time or the ability to be able to do that was really painful to watch. So yeah, I concur with you. And I also appreciate hearing you all have mentioned the ways in which most of the things that I take issue with the secular movement, you all are fully aware of and addressing, right? But, what I would like to see the secular movement, which Fish Stark did talk about during his meeting, was really like, the intersectionality of this shit. Like, where are you talking about misogyny? Are you talking about how that shows up in secular spaces? Because it is there. Where is the female leadership? Where are non-binary people in your movement? Where are all of these people who are having an ability to lead from? I see it, I know that there are a few key female leaders in the secular movement, but they're generally not the people who are getting the most spotlight, if you will. And I would love to see them really tackle, how does humanism, atheism, secularism address these topics, right? And so that is probably part of them. The other part is just my personal experience, serving in the Humanist chaplaincy and going through divinity school as a Unitarian Universalist and trying to discern which path I wanted to go down, spending a year in the Humanist chaplaincy and then graduating with the Unitarian Universalist at Div School. The distinction could not have been more clear to me between how you tend to the heart as secularists, right? So it's not enough to get together and debate things, right? And just stay strictly up here. Like, hey, how do you welcome a new baby in your community?
Well, it's fascinating that you say that, because that's all those things that I've been...
That you're developing.
Developing is exactly that.
So
exactly
I will say that the other thing that irritates me is that you all are reinventing the wheel that we've been doing for 200 years. So we helped write the religious manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto, right? Like, so our religious traditions that are religious, like child blessings and marriages, they're all secular. Mm-hmm. They're done elemental. We're talking about air and water and soil and fire and all of these things, and we're doing these things in a secular specific way. People can opt to include religious language should they wish to, but most of those things, most of our religious rituals, if you will, are secular in nature. Yeah. And so, like, rewriting it rather than just saying, hey, like, let's work together to create something that serves everyone, or hey, like, reaching out and acknowledging, hey, the UUs do this, there's a reason we're not utilizing their resources, right? But like acknowledging, because my best friend is in seminary right now at Candler, so a Methodist seminary, and she's a UU, and all the Methodists there are like, wouldn't it be awesome if we had a congregation of people who had all different beliefs? And she's like, we've been doing that for so long now. And so like this idea of like this thing already exists, and it's our fault for not marketing it better, but this thing already exists, and everybody's just like pretending like they're creating a whole new thing. And so I get curious about like, you know, if we are doing our job effectively as Unitarian Universalists, we'll always need community. But essentially, if our values are propagated out into the world, you'll no longer need us, right? And so,
Right. I mean, yes.
so like, at what point do we kind of all merge together, I guess is my question. And it's less of an irritation. I get irritated when people are saying literally like our belief system and then like sticking on like humanism and like ignoring that it like sprung from Unitarian Universalism. That's just a personal annoyance. But it's just an erasure of a tradition that's already existed.
It's fascinating. You're reminding me of the fact that I went to Vanderbilt Divinity School, and one of my best friends in Divinity School is a Unitarian Universalist, and she was second career, and I was kind of coming into ministry a little later too, and it was fascinating because she chose to come down to Vanderbilt because she said I wanted to be in a school and in a place where I felt like there was a little more of the Spirit. She said so many of our UU congregations are what you just described about them are, she said, we're so rational and it's so about the up here. And she said, I wanted to get down in the South where some of our communities have more spirituality. And I wanted to go to school where there was more spirituality. And it made me laugh because I was like, every Christian that goes to Vanderbilt is told don't go there because they're heathens and they're going to tear your faith down. And she came there because it was a more spiritual place. Right. But you're right. There's this real hunger to unite head and heart and unite across humanity. And people have been doing that in lots of different ways in lots of different communities for a long time. And what can we learn from the past? Because, you know, another thing I've noticed in this season we're living in is there are a lot of white people freaking out, and a lot of persons of color are like, this is nothing new. Yeah. I mean, this is just same old story. You're just finally paying attention right now, you know. And, you know, so there are a lot of people right now saying, where have y'all been? Right. We've been doing this a long time. And so there are so many different people we can learn from as we're trying to lean into our common humanity again.
Yeah, you're right. I will definitely acknowledge that a lot of the work that has been done and the training that's been developed has been done by religious or UU communities in the past. And, you know, we think we're Johnny-come-lately here, reinvent the wheel. No. A lot of that work has been done. And to your point, I think you're right that a lot of the times when, especially as a, you know, brand new baby atheist, sometimes the first thing they can do is, you know, post a meme or whatever, like, you know, Christians so dumb. And it's just sort of like as a way of saying, hey, I'm here, plant a flag. Or, you know, it's not so much to say what you just said in the meme. It's more like to say, hey, I'm here and you're not alone. And yet we still need to do the work of finding the language in a positive way of saying, okay, what are you for without stepping on somebody else? So I will definitely acknowledge what you're saying. And you know, one thing that I've experienced personally within the last 5 years that I probably would never have guessed 15 years ago when I was that baby atheist is how much in my personal life it is possible to find commonality and get along, like with my very Christian, very invested, ministry-focused family. In the last couple of years, the way we've come together and supported each other, I never would have guessed. And I think that's broader, it's true more broadly within the broader secular community. I think the first time that I ever came to a Conversation Coalition, I was like, oh wow, maybe there is a better way to do what we've been doing with the debates and the zingers and the mic drop and all the gotchas. And it's like, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. And I really give a lot of credit to this organization to just like, man, talk about a teachable moment of how to have a conversation and be a part of the solution rather than being a part of the problem. The divisiveness, it's like, I think we all have a lot to learn from each other, and I've certainly appreciated what you guys have been talking about tonight. So,
awesome. That, and you guys all kind of touched on the where I want to go to wrap it up tonight, but I wouldn't be doing my job well if I didn't take this opportunity, because I know nobody will listen once we're all done and clapping for the wonderful speakers on stage. So I need to tell you about the very easy, simple way that you can continue to make this happen, folks. You too, by the way, everybody out there that's online, if you're hearing my voice right now, you can do something. So the Conversation Coalition is an event put on by Secularizing US, a 501c3 that we started right here in Nashville at the end of 2024 with pretty much this exact goal that everybody's been talking about on stage today. How can we connect and work together and progress forward with the values that are actually important to us? Not so much about the things we're against, but the things that we're for. And one of the easiest things you can do, by the way, to help support us, other than, of course, donating, because, you know, we're a 501c3, which means it's all tax deductible, so great for that. But, you know, the TikToks and the Facebooks, they are super important. Simply liking or sharing this event on those places, you can find us on all of them: TikTok, Facebook, Meetup. What else is there? Instagram, LinkedIn. I don't know. Do people use LinkedIn still, right? Right? People still use LinkedIn. I don't know. Okay. If you see us on LinkedIn, say hi. Other than that, guys, tell your friends about it. It's really the easiest thing that you can do is just next time you're having a conversation with a buddy and they asked you, hey, anything new going on in your life? Tell them, yeah, there's actually this really weird group that gets together once a month on the last Thursday, and they all come together and they talk about things where they disagree and try to find common ground and you know, a step forward. So it's an awesome, awesome time, and again, it only happens because you guys show up and participate. So speaking of, let me tell you about the cool events that are coming up in the future, and then I will throw it to you guys for one final wrap-up thought here. Our next Conversation Coalition event, just the regularly scheduled event, will be right here once again on April 30th. Again, that's the last Thursday of the month, and we will be asking the question, why do we even do this? What's the point? Do we really get anything out of it, or are we all just blowing a bunch of hot air? We will hopefully answer that question, but if we don't, you know, we'll still do another one in May. So, but we do have a very special, fun event coming in the middle of May that is outside of our normal event schedule. So on May 11th, at Tailgate Brewery, that's a Monday. I know, we always do them on Thursdays, I know. But May 11th, we will be renting out the barn at Tailgate Brewery's headquarters on Charlotte Pike. So it is in the back of their facility. We will be having the head pastor of this church, Jeff Strezoff, will be giving a talk called The Art of Disagreement. Actually, the reason that he is not here with us today is because he is currently in Cincinnati giving that exact talk. So we're really, really excited for that. If you've never been out to Tailgate Brewery on Charlotte Pike, it's an absolutely wonderful establishment. They have really good food, really good beer. I know we're in a Methodist church, so we don't have alcohol here, but if you'd like to have some good food and drink while you learn how to disagree with somebody, that's the place to do it. Yes? Oh, it'll be the same time. All of these start at, doors open at 6 p.m., and then we will start at 6:30. So, again, April 30th, right here, same time, same place, and then May 11th, we'll be out at Tailgate Brewery in West Nashville. So, to kind of wrap us up, what lessons can we learn from the other communities? What thing do you think, hey, look, like you've kind of touched on, the UU congregations have been doing this stuff for a while, you know? But also, like you guys touched on, the value set that come through oftentimes in the non-religious or secular space, those are all good things, but what do you think? What is one thing you really think your community could learn from some of the other communities that we've talked about tonight?
I'll start. I think the creative energy around, I mean, I know I just crapped on this, but at the same time, like the creative energy to say, like, what is needed right now And what can we create together from the ground up right now that feeds us in the way that we need to be fed? What's going to serve us that is new? Like just the energy and momentum around the secular movement has been really exciting for probably the last 20 years, to create something that could be just really dazzling and serve humanity in a really delicious way. And I get really excited about you all fomenting something into like this in particular, right? Like what a beautiful idea about it to be done on a regular basis, and this idea of bridging the gap in this really beautiful way. I think that is something that we can deeply appreciate and learn from. So that's what I offer.
Yeah, whoever.
I think from what we can learn a lot from y'all's side is just, and I think we are trying to really be careful and appreciate what it is. Like, we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. That's not particularly not what we're trying to do. We are trying to, I suppose, learn from what history has taught us already and see what we can do with that, with also a pure clarity and a very honest way forward. And I do think ritual, for example, is something that I really looked at, because I feel like ritual, rhythm, all those kinds of things, I've learned a lot from looking at religious communities just by doing that, and especially how that can make a transition from somebody that has maybe deconstructed, make it a little bit easier, and just feel like, oh, I still have this rhythm, without having to completely end up in a void, So those are things that I've already looked at, and I'm still to this day looking at for new ideas. And I think there's a lot of synergy that can exist between what you're talking about and what I'm talking about. I think it can be a beautiful collaboration, None of it has to be against each other, I think. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it does.
Let's see. What came to mind for me was, as the representative of Christians on this panel, is the secular and atheist and agnostic community's fearless pursuit of the truth and trust of the truth. And in Christianity, we use that word truth a lot historically. Pilate said to Jesus, it's like, what is truth, right? It's like, and I think a lot of times there are a lot of Christians out there that believe they have all the answers and don't want to listen to anybody else. And also don't want to learn from the world around them, don't want to learn from our history, don't want to learn from our science, don't want to learn from anything other than one particular perspective on their particular text. And it's a detriment to them, it's a detriment to their communities, it's a detriment to their ability to be in community with the larger world. And so I think the more Christians that aren't afraid of the truth and trust what Scripture says about the truth setting us free would be in a much better place.
Yeah, man, I really vibe with that. That really connects with, it's something that belongs to all of us, and just really not seeking that ownership or that, just something that, hey, it's all part of the human experience. And at the end of the day, in a lot of ways, we're all trying to solve for the same solution. I mean, in terms of what we within the secular movement can learn, oh my gosh, so much. So much. I mean, everything from like what you were talking about earlier with not just being up in a very uber rational headspace, but just a really feeling and speaking from the gut, from the heart, from the like touching the fullness of what it means to be a human being and the experience. So much to learn and appreciate and just value what's being done And even just like mundane things that are, at the end of the day, not so mundane, like one thing churches do incredibly well is take big ticket theological concepts and make them accessible to a 5-year-old over chocolate chip cookies in Sunday school. And it's like, wow, that is where it really is powerful in terms of the simplicity of it and breaking it down in an understandable way and like the teachable moments and telling stories. Wow, what a incredible way to connect something that you value with the lived human experience. I think we're learning so much. And where I hear you saying, Brandon, where it's like, okay, it's not anything that we've ever invented. You might be excited about it, but you haven't just figured this out. Somebody's probably said it before and probably better, right? We all have the ability to, or should have the ability to learn from what's gone before us and also learn from what's next to us. And that's where I feel I've really appreciated the conversation today. So.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, it was absolutely wonderful, you guys. And before I let you go, once again, April 30th, May 11th, those are the next two events coming up. Find us online. We're on all the things, Secularizing US and Conversation Coalition. Be safe getting home tonight. But first, give our wonderful panelists an amazing round of applause. That was an absolutely incredible event. Thank you all so much. And get home.